Hi, welcome back to Projects with Everyday Dave. I've been doing woodworking for several decades now, and I've done all my sanding by hand. And while I was building this house, I had hundreds and hundreds of board feet of trim to put in. And I started out sanding it by hand, and finally I decided I could justify using one of these drum sanders. And boy, have I been missing out. Originally, I had purchased a different sander, but I had so many problems with it, I packed it back up on the pallet and shipped it back to the manufacturer and purchased this JET 1632. And man, am I glad I did. This thing has exceeded my expectations. In another video, I'll show you the difference between the two sanders and why I ended up with this one, and maybe that will help you out. But today, we'll just look at how to install these extension tables, and then we'll take a look at the performance improvement and see if they're worth the expense. So let's put them on. I got my new Infeed Outfeed Tables for my JET 1632 drum sander, so let's get them put on.
This box is heavy. There's a lot of steel in it. The Outfeed tables are 2mm thick solid galvanized steel, and the brackets themselves are 3mm thick galvanized steel. Now, even though those parts are really heavy and strong, I was able to flex the tables a little bit after I installed them. So we'll have to see if that affects the performance at all.
All right, there's all our parts, our two tables, the guide brackets for each, and the hardware. So let's get it put on. There's two different lengths of brackets, a long one for the front and a short one for the back. And there's two different length bolts. So we take the longer bolt, put a washer on it. Take one of the longer brackets, feed the bolt through it. For now, we'll just put them in finger tight until we get everything roughly in place, because we have to get everything level before we tighten it up. Now we can just put the plate on. One of the reasons I kept the brackets loose so I could get these to fit in. They're a little bit tight. Washer on the end of each screw and thread it in the hole. Now that can be adjusted all around, which we'll do once we get the other side on. Now we can put the top plate on. With the plates set in place, I can tighten the main mounting bolts and then adjust the plate. Now I'll use a couple of straight edges to get everything perfectly flat.
I thought using straight edges and clamps would be a foolproof way to make sure everything was perfectly flat across the feed table. But after clamping everything up and tightening the screws down, after I released the pressure, for some reason it wasn't exactly flat. But it did get me in a really close place, so all I had to do is make a slight adjustment.
That didn't work quite as well as I hoped. You can see there's a gap at the back edge on both sides.
With the infeed and outfeed tables mostly in place, I just left my straight edge clamped in the middle and then loosened the outboard bolts and even the inboard bolts in some cases, and just made a slight little adjustment to it to get it flat to the straight edge, and that worked really well. With that slight adjustment, everything came out perfectly flat. In the end, it wasn't the miracle solution I was hoping for, but I think it was still faster than trying to adjust everything one at a time.
There we go. All good.
Okay, now everything's together. Let's power it up and run a few things through. The nice thing about this sander is the feed table and the drum sander itself are very quiet. You can hear a little bit of ticking there because I have it set really thin to run this thin piece of wood through. The sandpaper's touching the feed table slightly. But as I run this nice thin piece of stock through, it feeds in and out smoothly, and the table on the backside catches it, which is really convenient. Now with the longer boards, I noticed a lot more improvement with the Infeed Outfeed tables. It was a lot easier to get the boards lined up going in through the sander. I was able to get them pretty much perfectly level to feed in, and then as they fed through, it helped to stabilize the boards. When I'm doing really long boards, like 14 feet long, it's really hard to prevent them from bouncing without some stabilizing support. Now, this particular board I ran through is warped, and as it fed through, it started to lift itself off of the feed belt because it was cupped up. And you can see there, it actually stopped feeding. I had to give it a little bit of a tug. There was no noticeable impact on the sanded surface, but it is one thing to consider. If you're running significantly warped boards through, it may have some issues feeding them.
Well, here's the verdict. The sander works really well without these Infeed Outfeed tables, but they do add some advantages. When I'm doing bookmarks or some small pieces like that and I feed them through, it's really nice to have them caught on the other side without them falling off the back or having to put a bin for them to fall in. So for very small pieces, I didn't think it'd be that helpful, but actually I did like it for that. For larger pieces, longer pieces, it is nice to have the Infeed table. It helps me get it started exactly flat. And I did notice that I had fewer ripples or slight variations in thickness from the board bouncing up and down. So that is an improvement. However, if the board is warped, basically, or particularly up, then when it hits the Infeed Outfeed tables, it'll lift it off the feed belt. And you saw in the video there that it would stop for a second on the one board. I had to push it to get it through. So, and then if it's warped the other way and it's cupped up, then the Infeed Outfeed tables aren't really doing anything. So for warped boards, there is some impact. It wasn't a big problem, but the one thing the one negative for me about these Infeed Outfeed tables is they don't flip up and down. So it's made my tool considerably larger. And in that case, it makes it harder to store. But it has been a lot nicer to have them on there. The flexing that I was concerned about doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. Boards still feed in pretty well. So all in all, I'll leave them on and we'll see how they do over time, and I'll give you an update. Otherwise, stick around and I will do a review of this drum sander compared to the other one that I purchased and had to return. And I'll show you why I like this one better and some of the issues I had with the other sander. And I can definitely recommend it for hobby or serious woodworkers. So I hope that was helpful. Happy woodworking.